sports talk radio this week. Do you feel that the league had maybe some sort of ulterior motive to not be hard on these Lakers players because they didn't want to bury their lead story? They didn't want to bury LeBron James's chances to get to the playoffs by having, maybe an Ingram out 15 games and a Rondo out 10 games or whatever, and this team is already 0-3 now. Did they have any type of motivation as a league not to bury LeBron early in the season?
Well, when you see the amount of games that the Lakers have on national TV, albeit either TNT, ESPN, NBA TV, you do have to look at that of what product that they're putting out there to an audience. And I know a topic that you and I want to get into as the season draws on is these late starts for the Lakers on the West Coast. How's that going to affect the popularity of LeBron? Is that going to stunt some of his popularity or hurt some of the ratings for the games that he's involved in, having them on so late for the East Coast audience? But I wouldn't put it past them at this point. I mean, there's been so many rumors about what's going on in the league and some of the things that they've done, whether it be the draft or even things like suspensions and even the back in the day with the whole Chris Paul to the Lakers and how that got turned down. And so the league has put themselves in precarious positions before. I wouldn't doubt that early in the season that they would much rather see the Lakers off to a hot start and continue this story versus potentially putting themselves in a position where they're fighting back all year and they're in such a hole that then they sort of become a non-story. So I wouldn't put it past the league at that point, Eric. I'd definitely say that my eyebrows were raised when I saw those numbers come out, for sure. So let's talk about those Lakers, Eric, because right now, as we record this on Tuesday evening this week, the Lakers are 0-3 after their loss in overtime on Monday night to the Spurs. But they have some company down there at the bottom of the West. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they're also 0-3. The Rockets 1-2. We are super, super early in the NBA season. No need to press the panic button just yet. But whose slow start has you more concerned at this point?
That's actually a great question, Justin, because I know we don't want to panic. I know it's really early in the season. We've even seen a couple years ago where the Golden State Warriors had a really slow start to the season, and everybody thought, are they kind of drying up after their championship runs? And, of course, it doesn't really matter because then they do what they do at the end of the season. I'm not really that concerned about the Rockets at all. The Oklahoma City Thunder, 0-3 is a bad look, but I don't think that's really where they're going to be, and I don't think that's representative of their team. I don't think Westbrook and George, once they get into the middle of the season and with that playoff push, I don't think that's really the team they're going to be. I tell you who does concern me, and it's those Lakers for a couple of reasons. Now, admittedly so, I've watched all three of these games, and it's not like they're getting blown out or they're bad losses, all of them. However, what I'm seeing is a LeBron James that's kind of all over the place. There's really no connection yet with any of the players. There's a lot of work to be done there. There's even some things in the roster, Justin, that I don't really like. I think Hart is playing so much better than Caldwell Pope right now. And so if it were me, I would get to the point where I put Hart as the starter rather than Caldwell Pope. I think that's a move that needs to be made pretty soon. I love the development of Kuzma. I don't think that Lonzo Ball is adding a whole lot right now. I haven't seen a huge development from last year to this year. Now you're going to have Rondo out for a couple of games. You're going to have Ingram out for a couple of games. This is just going to be a situation that's molding throughout the season. And quite frankly, out of the teams that you mentioned, this is the one in the most danger because they can't afford to get too far below 500. You talked about when we were texting the other night that they're trying to play JaVale McGee 25 to 30 minutes a game, and that's just not something he's been accustomed to, even when he was with the Warriors. I mean, he was a guy that would come in, have an impactful 10 to 15 minutes and do his duty, but, to make him a guy that's, getting up there in minutes, that's a problem, I think, at least right now, because he's just not used to that. And then, Justin, the other thing I'm seeing is that if you sort your stats by most minutes per game, you're going to see Mr. LeBron James right there at the top again with nearly 40 minutes a game. I don't think that can continue, and we talked about that a few weeks ago in the NBA preview, that that's a bad thing to do because you're going to wear him out and it's going to be all for naught because you're not going to win the championship this year, LA. It's not going to happen. So don't go into the first year of a 4-year deal and wear the wheels off of LeBron James.
For the Rockets, I'm not too worried about them. I think they'll get things righted again. They're a team that depends on shooting. So when they go through slumps, they don't look very good. And when they're hot, they destroy people. We saw last year they go on a couple different runs where they just got on massive hot streaks. So they'll get Harden going. We'll get Chris Paul back from his suspension in a few games. I think they'll ultimately be fine. Oklahoma City's a little bit tougher because Westbrook didn't play their first 2 games, and they opened on the night that Golden State got their rings on opening night without Russell Westbrook, so that's a tough game. The game that Russell came back, they lost to the Kings. That's a little concerning, but again, it's his first game coming off the knee injury. Didn't really have any of the preseason to get himself in shape, so I think it's going to take a little bit of time for them. So Oklahoma City, a team, I think, maybe give them 10 to 15 games in and see where they are before I'd be too concerned as a Thunder fan. But yeah, the Lakers, I mean, it's a problem. When you look at them, what they've given up, 128 points, 124 points, 143 points in overtime to the Spurs, that's a lot of points. They're not playing a lot of defense, and they're struggling to shoot the basketball, which is what we've seen LeBron James' team do pretty well when they're having success. He gets himself into the paint, he kicks it out to his shooters, and that creates that space. If the Lakers can't start making shots, those lanes for LeBron are going to start to clog up because guys aren't going to respect. They're going to sag, and they're going to say, okay, fine, go ahead and beat us from 3. You're shooting 30% from there. We'll take that versus LeBron shooting 75% in the paint. We'll take those odds. Analytics says those are good odds to take. So those are some of the things I think the Lakers have to work through. They're getting a ton of paint points right now, but they're a team that's up and down, and that's not been what LeBron has typically succeeded with throughout an entire game. He has spurts where he's extremely good in transition, but not just running up and down the court. Brian Windhorst had an article last year about LeBron sort of resting at times on defense and then taking his time on the offensive side where he could sort of play off the ball at times, or he would hold the ball some. This Laker team, they're up and down the court. They're fun to watch, but God, Eric, they don't play any defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to start to defend my guy LeBron a little bit when people start to say that he's resting a little bit on defense when he's on the floor. Guess what? Other guys are playing 28 to 30 minutes, and the rest of the time they're on the bench. LeBron's playing 40 minutes. So if he's spending 5 or 6 minutes with a little bit of lackadaisical defense, that's no different than other guys sitting their butts on the bench. It's kind of laughable at this point because he's out there so much that what are you expecting him to be able to run full court for 40 straight minutes? It's amazing what he does at his 15th year in the league. It's incredible. But Justin, you hit the nail on the head. This team is not at all built like any of his teams, especially the Miami days, especially the second go-round with the Cavaliers. There just are not shooters on this team that LeBron James is accustomed to having. And I think that really changes his style of basketball. And I'm not sure that when you're headed into the 16th through the 20th years in the NBA, that you want to be changing the style of basketball you play. So I look for this to become a developing story because we talked about how this trade deadline would loom large in LA. This could be one of those Cavaliers type situations that we saw last year where this roster could be almost like 40% remade by the time we get through the winter. We'll see. We'll see on that because I actually think there might be something to that.
Well, LeBron has preached patience with this team, and they've got a lot of young pieces and they've got assets. Do you think that LeBron, though, in the heat of things is going to be content this year not being in contention at all? Do you think that he's going to press the panic button at some point and make them sort of jump this process, or do you think he stays patient this year?
I think it's a balance. I think he's going to say the right things. I mean, he's going to preach patience, and he's going to do everything he can to mentor these younger players, but there is going to be a tipping point where you've got to move on from some, and then you've got to keep others. Like I said, with Kyle Kuzma, the development that he's made in a 12-month period, it's really large. And so I look at a guy like him. I mean, the Spurs were coveting him when we're talking about Kawhi Leonard a year ago, and the Lakers said, no, not a chance. We're not moving Kuzma. So I look at guys like that. I look at guys like Josh Hart. I mean, look at the numbers he's putting up off of the bench. That's why I say putting him in a starter role might be just a little bit of juice for that team. However, I know that LeBron is going to say the right things. I know he's going to do the right things, at least publicly. But again, you're in your 16th through 20th year. You just can't have that much patience. I know he's not expecting to win the NBA championship this year, so he can have patience in as much as the fact that, yeah, you're going to be maybe the 7th or 8th seed in the playoffs and go no further. But you can't kick that can much further down the road than that.
Well, that's going to be a story that we'll follow. We'll watch. Again, this team, this roster, it just doesn't feel like right now it's fitting. It's only been 3 games, so we got to give them time. But you've got a lot of guys that like to have the basketball in their hands. And typically the way LeBron has been successful is that he's been the guy that has the ball in his hands, or he's had a guy like Kyrie that can break nearly anybody down in the league. And I don't see another guy on this roster that has that ability just one-on-one to be able to go get their shot. That's not what Lonzo Ball does. It's not what Rajon Rondo does. You said it, Kuzma's definitely, that guy has become Mr. Offense. I mean, he doesn't see a shot that he doesn't like at this point. I mean, he is jacking them up. I mean, even J.R. Smith's like, geez, this guy's just got no conscience at this point. So it'll be interesting, the development on this team, what they feel. Is Lonzo Ball a guy that they could flip for a shooter that they're going to need down the road? Something like that I see this team maybe doing, not getting rid of a Kuzma or an Ingram, but a guy like Ball that seems lost on this team, and maybe another team could make him their point guard of the future, and they've got shooters and wings. I could see that happening with this team, but the patience that LeBron has is going to be very interesting to watch as this year goes on. One last question on the NBA before we move it over to NASCAR, and that's on the Raptors. Eric, you didn't like this Raptors team to be a contender when we talked about Toronto in our preview show, but the Raptors now 4-0. Kawhi looks like he's fitting in quite nicely with this team. They got a big win this past Friday night against the Boston Celtics in Toronto. So do you feel differently about this team now than you did a few weeks ago?
We might have to do a segment where Eric was wrong. Yeah, I mean, look, it's an early reaction again, just like we said with the teams that are 0-3 and 1-2. We're not going to push the panic button. I'm not just going to send the Raptors to the finals at this point, but they have, in their 4 wins, they've beaten a couple of good teams. So I look at that as a very positive thing. Got Lowry playing well with Kawhi Leonard. It looks like maybe they're actually a better duo than DeRozan ever was with Lowry. If they can keep that momentum going, I say they beat the over that we were looking at earlier in the season, and they have a chance to make a run in the playoffs. But we're so early. That's about all I'm going to say about it because I'm a proud guy. I'm not willing to say I'm wrong just yet, Justin.
I think they're going to be there in the mix just because of the East, where it's basically going to be Boston, Philly, and Toronto. And then however those teams seed themselves and how it works out, where you really want to try to get to the 1 seed because the 2 and the 3 teams are going to beat each other up, and who's ever in that 4 slot's just not going to be as difficult as one of those other teams. So I think these teams fighting for wins, every win now in this Eastern Conference is going to be important, because if you're the 1 seed and you can let Philly and Boston beat each other up before they get to the conference finals, that could be big for Toronto because there's no LeBron now in the East, and Toronto's made enough moves. They've got a player that's had playoff success in Kawhi Leonard. He looks like, for all the talk, he looks like he's an engaged player and he's enjoying being in Toronto at this point. And he looks back to the guy like that was that MVP candidate a few years ago. This Toronto team, they've performed very well in the regular season. It's always been how they've disappointed in the playoffs. So it'll be interesting going forward. How many wins can they rack up? Where are they seated? And can they finally get this monkey off their back and have some success in the playoffs?
You know who has a monkey on his back is Tristan Thompson, because he was saying that the Cavaliers were going to be better this year than they were with LeBron James, make it to the playoffs, and all the other garbage that he said. And by the way, they're 0-3.
And they haven't looked very good at all. So, yeah, Tristan, be quiet. Stick to your hookah bars and whatever you're doing there in D.C. and the Kardashians. Just live that lifestyle, because your NBA prognostication you're not very good. So, Rick, let's swing it over to the track. NASCAR is deep into their playoffs. They just went to the round of 8. Thinking back a couple months ago, we had an interview with Jim Noble, and one of the questions we asked him at that time was Chevy was really struggling at that point. They hadn't had a win except for Austin Dillon at the Daytona 500. That's almost a little bit of a fluky type race. It doesn't really show the type of speed that Chevy's had, and they had really struggled at this point. We were in the middle of the summer, and the question was, would a Chevy driver be able to get it turned around and make some noise in the playoffs? And simply put, at that point, we felt, and I think Jim even felt, that he didn't see enough from them to feel comfortable with that. Well, Chase Elliott has bucked that trend, because all of a sudden, he might be the hottest driver in the sport. He wins 2 of 3 races in this round of 12 and advances to the round of 8. But we also saw going into the playoffs, Brad Keselowski rip off 3 straight wins. And Eric, he was eliminated on Sunday. He's not even in the playoffs anymore. So based on the momentum that Chase Elliott has, do you feel like he can ride this out and make a run at a championship? Or is he more likely to end up like Brad Keselowski?
I'd say it's a tough question because as far as winning a championship, you've got one race at Homestead to do that.